2009, my life changed in the blink of an eye. I open my eyes and look around. All I see is 4 white walls and 2 nurses standing in the door. One of the nurses noticed that I'm awake, and she hurries towards me with a phone in her hand. She places it by my ear. On the other end, I hear my dad's voice. It's full of panic. Emilie, Emilie, what's happening? Dad, I think I fall off a horse. I look down on myself, and all I see is blood. I can't feel my legs. I start to panic. No, Dad. I've been in a car accident. And then everything goes black. When I finished high school in 2009, I had one dream, one goal: to become a professional horse rider. Horses had always been part of my life, and since I was 6 years old, I've been competing in show jumping. After my graduation, I got offered a job as a professional horse rider in China. So at 19 years old, I traveled alone to Dalian in northern China. But 6 weeks in, my stay took a dramatic turn when I was a passenger in a car accident. We were out scouting buildings for a new horse riding center. The last thing I remember was feeling uncomfortable with how fast we were going on the narrow country road. We swerved to avoid a motorcycle, flipped, rolled down the hill, and landed upside down in a lake. Or so I was told. The driver and I were the only 2 wearing our seat belts, and also the only 2 survivors. One of the passengers died instantly, and my boss passed away in the ambulance before getting to the hospital. So there I was, waking up alone, with no idea where I was or what had just happened. No, Dad, I've been in a car accident. Those were the last words to my father before I passed out again. The next time I woke up, my mom was there. I remember the look on her face when she saw me. I remember the fear in her eyes. I remember looking in the mirror, not being able to recognize myself. My whole face was black, blue, swollen with stitches and wounds everywhere. And in that moment, I realized how serious the accident had been. I was scared. It was also then I got to know what happened to the other passengers in the car. I was completely broken. It took me 3 more weeks before I was cleared to fly back to Denmark. But little did I know at the time that this was when the real recovery began, the mental recovery. When we are 19, we often feel invincible. I had just finished high school with good grades, and my professional horse riding career was about to start. I knew I was a really good horse rider. No horse was too wild and no jump was too high. I knew exactly what I wanted and how I was going to get it. But the accident changed everything. And for a long time, I couldn't understand why this had happened to me and why I had survived. And I spent a lot of time punishing myself for moving to China. And I was filled with feelings I didn't know how to handle. But life went on, and I quickly decided that I didn't want to let fear knock me down. I decided to forget about China, like it never happened. I deleted pictures and other evidence that I ever went there. And I tried not to talk to anybody about it, because not even to my family, because I knew how hard it had all been for them. But sometimes the need to talk about it would creep in anyway, and I would try to mention it to people. But I was often greeted with, "Oh, you don't have to tell me about that. or an awkward silence. So I decided it was better to forget it. Then a few months after I recovered physically, I decided to give up on horse riding. It just didn't feel right anymore. Something had changed. I had changed. And as hard as it was to give up on a dream I'd had since I was 6 years old, it was also my time to reinvent myself. So that was what I did. Because as much as we can control what happened to us in life, we can control how we choose to deal with it. And one day I woke up and I realized that I've been given a second chance. And it was up to me to make the most of it, even if it didn't involve horses anymore. Because I didn't want to be afraid, sad, or angry anymore. I wanted to be strong again. And in that moment, I remember a thought I had when I woke up in that hospital bed in China. I remember thinking to myself, if I'm ever going to be able to walk again, I want to learn how to surf. So I walked into a travel agency and I came out with a one-way ticket to Australia. After everything I've been through that past year, moving to Australia was one of the scariest decisions I ever made. But sometimes the things we are most afraid of starting ends up being the most beautiful chapters of our lives. I moved to Sydney and I signed up for a weekend surf course. I absolutely sucked. But I was so determined to learn how to surf that I stayed in the water for more than 6 hours that day. Yes, imagine how I looked like after 6 hours in the Australian midday sun. It wasn't pretty. But that first time I stood up was everything. I felt rush, I felt joy, I was free. I had found my mojo again. And my time in Australia was life-changing. And the years went by. I surfed, I traveled, I studied. I even made the Danish national surf team, and I represented my country at the European and the World Championships. And before I knew it, I was 27 years old, living the dream in Portugal. But one thing was still haunting me: China. It was just sitting there in my chest and in my head. And not one day went past without me telling the same story in my head. And the fear and anxiety often came up when I was driving with other people. But I was often too scared to say anything. So I'd just sit there in the car, terrified, focusing on my breath with wet palms. Then 4 years ago, I spent my first winter in Portugal. It was cold, rainy, and quiet. And I had a lot of time to myself and a lot of time to think. So I finally decided to write down the story that'd been on repeat in my head for 7 years. I wasn't sure what to do with it. So the first thing I did was to send it to my parents, which scared me. But they called me back crying and told me I had to share it. And it opened up for a conversation with them that I've been afraid of for so many years, because I knew how hard the whole thing had been for them. After that, I finally put my article online. And that was my therapy. I got messages from people from all over the world. People who wanted to share their stories with me, stories that had nothing to do with my story, but everything to do with speaking up and showing vulnerability. And for the first time, I discovered how powerful social media can be and how it can be used in a positive way to share and connect with people in similar situations. I got messages from people who felt I gave them the courage to leave an abusive relationship, or people who simply felt inspired to change their life, or people who felt I helped them gain the strength to share their own stories with loved ones or with the world. I made some beautiful connections and friendships. I was 19 when my life was turned upside down. And it took me 7 long years to be able to talk about it and make honest and deep connections again. And after that first step, I got immense support online and via social media. And that support gave me part of the courage to stand here today and share my story. Because we all tend to see vulnerability as a weakness. But the last few years and sharing my story have shown me that it's a huge strength and how important it is for me and my mental health and for my connections to the people around me. But speaking up and showing vulnerability isn't easy. It takes courage. It took me 7 years. And maybe that time could have been shortened if there had been more follow-ups from doctors. Or maybe I needed that time to heal. All I know is that I'm happy that I finally had the courage to share it. Because once we start to open up and once we start to listen, we create strong and meaningful relationships. So I encourage all of you to show your strength by showing your vulnerability and create the space for others to do the same. Because we all have a story and a voice that deserves to be heard. So what's yours? Thank you.